Hi, my name is Marty Miller, and I have been a volunteer here at the museum for about 10 years now, so I've worked most every job there is here, and now I get to do story time, which I've never done before. So I'm pretty excited. This book is called Fearless Flyer, and I wore my Blue Angel shirt because we have, here in Pensacola, have our own Fearless Flyers, don't we, in the Blue Angels? They're pretty awesome, so I thought I'd bring them in to talk about another Fearless Flyer, a woman named Ruth Law, who was one of the earliest people to fly airplanes, let alone women to fly airplanes. So this is her story, okay? The loop, the spiral dive, and the tip of death. Ruth loved to entertain folks with her daredevil tricks, but after 4 years of flying in circles, Ruth longed to fly to get somewhere far away. She made up her mind to fly from Chicago to New York City. So this is when she was doing air shows. She was doing the loops and the circles and flying around. It says, when Ruth Law made up her mind, there was no trying to stop her. Few aviators dared to fly across country in their flimsy flying machines. Hi, sweetie. If an engine had trouble, by the time the aviator realized it, there was often nowhere to land. Ruth had a secret weapon. She knew every nut and bolt on her machine. But Ruth also had a problem. She had never flown more than 25 miles. Her little biplane, built by pioneer Glenn Curtis, held only 16 gallons of gasoline. See, that's an old, old plane. It's one of the first ones ever. It's kind of like that one in the front of the museum that's turning around. You can go look at it. It's very similar. Ruth asked Mr. Curtis to sell her his latest flying machine. Victor Karlstrom had just flown 452 miles from Chicago to Erie, Pennsylvania, a new American record for nonstop flight. The huge plane had a partly enclosed cockpit and held 205 gallons of gas, enough to fly from Chicago to New York City without stopping. But Ruth couldn't convince Mr. Curtis. He worried she couldn't handle the powerful machine on such a long flight. Here she is trying to get a new airplane to make this long flight from Chicago to New York. Didn't work. But that didn't stop Ruth Law. Her little biplane would do it just fine, with a few adjustments. She added 3 extra gas tanks. Now the plane held 53 gallons. She installed a metal guard to protect her feet and legs from the frigid wind. She charted her course, marking the mountains and hills in red ink and outlining the rivers in blue. She cut the map into strips and attached them together on a roller, and she strapped that to her leg. Aviation experts thought the flight was doomed. Impossible. See, that's her little airplane again. And she sits right up there, and she's not protected from the cold. It's very, very cold when you go up in the air. She's not protected at all. So at 4 o'clock in the morning on November 19th, 1916, Ruth dressed in 4 flying suits and a skirt. The wind whipped from Lake Michigan over Grant Park at 50 miles an hour. Her mechanics begged her to wait until the weather improved, but Ruth had made up her mind. The wind would give her the extra speed she needed to get to New York City without stopping. It's cold on Lake Michigan and Chicago. She took off her skirt and tucked it behind her seat. There was no need to look like a lady up where she was going. She pulled down her goggles. Ruth was a little scared. At 8:25 a.m. Eastern Time, she was off. Ruth bumped faster and faster. She pulled the left lever back to raise the elevators. Her machine lifted up, up, up. The gusty wind tossed her right, left, up, and down. A little tiny airplane and 50-mile-an-hour winds, that's pretty windy. Slowly, she gained altitude. As quickly as the wind had gusted, it vanished. Would she have enough gasoline? Ruth held on to the left and right levers at all times. See these levers? That's how she steered the airplane. Made it go up and down and backwards and forwards and right and left. Ruth held on to the left and right levers at all times. One wrong move would send her tumbling from the sky. Holding the right lever with her knee, she turned the knobs on the map box strapped to her leg. See, there's a little tiny box, 6 inches square, and that has the maps. The only way she knew how to navigate from Chicago to New York was on that little box. Dipping under clouds, Ruth hunted for landmarks, molehill mountains, patchwork villages, lakes shining like silver dollars. Over Cleveland, Ohio, she checked the oil gauge. 0 pressure. Something was wrong. See, there she is over Cleveland. Should she try to land? Ruth listened to the sound of her motor. No clicks, no putts. Ruth knew her motor. It purred perfectly, so she kept flying. That's pretty brave. The icy cold pecked through her suits. She checked the next compass coordinates on the cuff of her glove. Erie, Pennsylvania, where Carlstrom had landed, the man whose record she was trying to break. See, there's when she's found where she was, another little village. Steering east of Erie, Ruth knew she had broken Carlstrom's record. But Ruth's excitement fizzled as the gas level dropped. If she could just make it to Hornell, New York, she could land on a racetrack. 10 miles away, her motor sputtered. Ruth looked desperately for a place to land. There was still gas in the tanks, but it was too low to feed the engine. Ruth had to tip the plane to feed gas into her engine. 2 miles from Hornell, the engine grumbled its last roar, leaving her with nothing but the silence and the wind. There she is, just coasting into her landing spot where she doesn't even know where she's going. Pretty scary stuff. Ruth threw the lever forward and glided. At 2:10 p.m. she touched down in Hornell. She had flown 512 miles, a new American non-stop record. But Ruth's journey wasn't over. Ruth Law had made up her mind to fly to New York City, and there was no use trying to stop her. So there's other pictures of her still going to fly. After refueling her plane and filling her stomach, she took off for New York City. A high hill topped with tall trees loomed in front of her. Ruth tried to climb, but the gas weighed her down. The trees grew closer, taller. She steepened her path. The branches clawed at the plane. She held on tight until all she heard was the hum, soothing of the sound of the motor. See, that tree almost knocked her down out of the air. Pretty scary again. She's fearless. Word had spread about Ruth Law. People along her flight path scanned the skies for the bird woman perched in the front of her flying machine. The sun dropped lower, painting the sky. Ruth squinted. She could barely read her compass. If only she had a light. New York City would have to wait until tomorrow. Heavy with disappointment, Ruth landed in Birmingham, New York. So she didn't make it quite to New York City. But there's always tomorrow. In the morning, a big crowd cheered as she took off. Soon a thick fog engulfed her. It tricked her, hiding rivers, erasing landmarks. Where was she? She flew lower and lower, coasting up hills and down into valleys, looking for landmarks, using precious gas. At last, Port Jervis, New York. She reset her compass course. See, she couldn't see anything for all that fog. I'd be scared. Finally, the tip of Manhattan appeared. The motor began to cut out. She climbed higher and higher. Gliding, Ruth circled the Statue of Liberty towards Governor's Island. She got to the Statue of Liberty in Manhattan. How cool is that? Ruth swooped over the sea wall and landed in 2 long hops, straight towards a welcoming band. She pushed down hard on the brake pedal. The plane slowed and stopped. There she is. There's a band welcoming her. In New York City, she finally made it. She set a record. Wait, I'm missing a page, I think. Oh, maybe not. Numb with cold, Ruth didn't move at first. Then she took off her gloves and leather helmet. Icicles dangled from her hair. She smiled at the cheering crowd. At that moment, realized she had done something more important than a non-stop record. The sky was my limit and the horizon my sphere. It's any woman's sphere if she has nerve and courage and faith in herself. She's got to have faith in herself. That was how Ruth Law lived and how she made her trip to New York. There's more about Ruth in this book if anybody cares to look at it, but I'm not going to read it. She did circle the Statue of Liberty the next day at the president's request. Hi.
Is this story real?
It's very real. She was a real woman. Yeah, this is a very true story. Pretty exciting, huh? For back then. Let's see. Is this done? I could read a little bit more on Ruth Law if you would like me to, but it's up to you.
I think we can finish it here.
Okay, great. It's a wonderful story and it's very true, and she was a true hero in American history.